Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Green, I'm the Director of Economics here at the RSA, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here this evening for a special event looking at leadership for the 21st century. So just before we begin, could I ask you to make sure your mobile phones are switched to silent? Please do have them on because you're very welcome to tweet. We have a hashtag for today, RSA Leadership. Housekeeping over, I'm delighted to introduce tonight's event. We've got a stellar panel to explore what social business can tell us about new models of leadership for the 21st century. So community businesses are one example of social enterprises, and this event also marks the culmination of the Community Business Leadership Programme. So this is a leadership development programme that's been run by the RSA in partnership with the Real Ideas Organisation and Sheffield University Management School, together with Power to Change, which is an independent charitable trust which supports and develops community businesses in England. Over the last 18 months, we have had the pleasure of working with over 50 community businesses, from Falmouth to Redcar and from community farms to community pubs. A number of the leaders from these organisations are in the audience this evening. Thank you. And represented on the panel. So before we turn to the panel, I'd like to reflect on why I believe that community business expresses many of the values of ideals of the RSA. And here we are in the great room, the historic room of the Fellows of the Royal Society. And there are 3 points really I wanted to highlight. First is that the RSA from our beginnings has always encouraged enterprise in all its forms, and this remains core to our work, to understand how commerce can deliver not just prosperity, but or even that it should do so without avoiding social and environmental harm, but rather how the power of business can be harnessed to positively drive social and environmental good. Second, at the core of the RSA Economy programme is the question, how can power be spread more evenly throughout the economy? How can we build a truly democratic economy? One of the hallmarks of community businesses is the participation of its customers, its workers and citizens in the governance and often the day-to-day running of the business. We think this is a really interesting quality of community business. And finally, our founder, William Shipley, was driven by a philosophy that in the middle of the 18th century was quite radical. And his philosophy was that anyone could have a good idea, or even a great idea, and that they should all deserve to have that idea taken seriously, including those of humble birth and shock horror in 1754 women. So the early prizes that were put out there by the Royal Society of Arts were open to everyone, and that was quite a sort of departure from the class-ridden society of the time. So that idea that anybody could have a good idea, I think, is also an ethos of community business. But if anyone can have a great idea, not just the executives, and if we can create organisations where co-workers can collaborate to turn these ideas into action, what then does leadership look like? Which brings us to tonight's question. And I could say in summary that what leadership looks like, perhaps, is this. So welcome to our panel. We have Jess Prendergast from the Onion Collective, Gordon Seabright from the Eden Project, Jack Graham from Year Here, and Richard Harries from the Power to Change. So please join me in extending a warm RSA welcome to the panel. So I'm going to ask each of our panellists for some opening thoughts on leadership before we'll open up the discussion amongst the panel and then to questions from the audience. So do kind of bear in mind your questions to save them up till the end. So I'll introduce each in turn before they make a few remarks. And we're going to start with Jess, our exemplar of community business here. Jess Prendergast is the director of the Onion Collective. She worked as a social researcher for the government and then at an independent think tank in Westminster. She was one of the team behind the £3 million Minehead Eye project, for which she remains a director. Jess.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Okay, so I'm just really going to talk a little bit about my experience in a leadership role. I'm one of 4, soon to be 5, directors of a social enterprise community business based in Watchet in West Somerset. And we're basically just some friends who spent quite a lot of time sitting in the pub and telling each other how things should be better and why doesn't someone do this and how is someone going to fix all the problems with jobs and aspiration and all of the issues that we have. And in the end, we kind of got bored of listening to each other talking about it, even despite all the cider, and we decided that we ought to be the people who did something about that. What we did was set up a community business of our own. It's a mission-led organisation. It's a social enterprise. And basically, we just do community regeneration in lots of different guises. So we've set up several other organisations under that umbrella, from tourism to youth to heritage and to culture. And we're about to start funding quite a major enterprise development on the quayside, which we're the preferred developer for. And we're also starting on a rather ambitious project to build not just a community business in our area, but a whole community industry. And I'll talk a little bit about that. What does that all mean for leadership? Well, in lots of ways, I was trying to come up with kind of novel and new things. And actually, in lots of ways, it means the same things that it always kind of meant. And so it's about bravery and having an over-keen sense of injustice and being tenacious and being okay at sitting on stages and talking to lots of people and believing that you can take a risk and that you shouldn't say no to things. And those are the kinds of things that have always been important for leadership. But in a context of social change, and particularly in a community, it also means quite a lot more than that. And for us, it's really about collective leadership. So that means several things. Partly, it just means that you're not on your own and that there are other people who have your back. So I'm actually not supposed to be here. Naomi, who is a director of Onion Collective, who actually went on the leadership programme, she's supposed to be sitting here, but she broke her leg last week very, very badly. And so you've got me instead. And that's kind of okay, because actually I can also do this just as well, maybe a teeny tiny bit better than she can. In fact, any of the five of us could have stepped in and sat here, and I'd trust any of them to do it, and I also know that they would know what to say. And the reason that I know that is because we're all really clear about what we're leading. And we're really clear about it because it hasn't come from us. It's come from our community. So I don't need to worry if Georgie or Rachel or Sally is going to go into a room with a different agenda or has got different ambitions or is trying to do something different to what I'm trying to do, because I know that we have a kind of shared set of priorities and that our ambition is shared. That's really important in terms of the fact that we can lead in our community. Having that kind of shared vision is really critical, and we went to a lot of effort to find out what that should be, and we consulted over many, many months with hundreds and hundreds of people, and we honed everyone's ideas and dreams and thoughts and fears into a kind of set of shared town priorities, and those priorities are now the thing that guides everything that we do whenever we think about a project. What that means is that the collective leadership isn't just about us in Onion Collective, it extends beyond us to all of the other community organisations in our town. And they support us because they've been part of that process, and we support them, and together we can achieve a great deal more. And all we're doing really is kind of creating lots of momentum and helping people to identify what it is they want and then helping them to get there. So just to give a kind of example, not a kind of example, a real example, in Watch It, despite it being Exmoor and beautiful and a wonderful, wonderful place to live, we have the lowest social mobility in the whole country. So that means if you're a young person, you have less chance of getting on and out and going and doing something different than anywhere else in the whole of the UK, which if you consider the situation in some northern towns, in some urban estates, the fact that being in this little place in Somerset is worse than that in this way is really quite phenomenal, and it's something that we feel we really need to do something about. And the main reason for it is basically there's no jobs, there's no enterprise, there's no industry, there's none of that kind of ambition and energy that drives things forward. On top of that, we had one employer, one big employer, who's been the big employer in our town for 250 years. So a heavy industry paper mill, where they basically make like Primark bags, brown paper bags, and the little things that go inside a toilet roll, whatever those things are called, whatever they're called. Anyway, so we don't make those anymore. the paper mill closed down at the end of 2015, and we lost 200 jobs overnight, just like that, and we lost the kind of defining industry. And for lots of places which have lost that kind of defining industry, whether it's steel production or tin mining or coal or fisheries, they've kind of collapsed in on themselves without this thing that holds everything together. And we don't want to do that, and our town doesn't want to do that. And the only thing we've got, really, is social capital. We would really like to have all kinds of capital. We have only social capital, and so we have to work with that. And so what we're doing is refusing to accept the kind of low-paid tourist economy that would be the natural thing that happens to a town like ours. And so we're instead taking on the ambitions of the community, and we're asking what would be an industry that we could build. How do we build it? Let's not do a community business. Let's do a whole community industry. What should it be? How are we going to get there? And we're asking all of those questions. And that takes, again, the kind of leadership skills that you get everywhere. It takes some guts, and it takes some bravado and some belief and a bit too much ambition sometimes, perhaps. But those things are really much easier and much more, we're much more able to be strong and be brave because we're all doing it together, not just us, but us and our town. And I don't want to end on a negative, and we've been told not to do negatives, but I also think it's really important that we acknowledge that sometimes community leadership, in whatever form, is really, really difficult. You know, Watch It isn't some sort of collective social utopia where everything's wonderful and we're all doing it together. And in some ways, the fact that we have this collective approach is because of quite bad reasons, and we need it for quite bad reasons. And part of that is because we're working for our community and we're doing it really publicly. So, for example, social media is a wonderful, wonderful thing in terms of communication, and in Watch It, it's kind of like an extension of word of mouth, and that's amazing. But it is also the work of the devil, and what it means is that everything we do is public, everything we do is commented on. Social media means that people can be harsher and harder and meaner than they ever would have been able to be before. And all of that really hurts really intensely if you're doing community, because it's your people, it's your town, you know those people personally, and it feels like everything you're doing is kind of being challenged. Challenge is fine, but sometimes it's, well, you all know what social media can be like. Anyway, I can honestly say that if I didn't have this collective organisation, if there weren't lots of us, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. I wouldn't be able to keep pushing on and keep trying to change things. So that collective leadership isn't just critical because it means we can do lots more things and we've got lots more ideas and we can have different approaches. It's the thing that kind of keeps us safe and steady and able to keep at it. So it's vital, I think, to our ability to create any social change, and it's vital to our ability to keep on being the people who are trying to do something.
Thank you, Jess. Jess has slightly dobbed me in it there by suggesting that I said no bad news, but actually what I said was...
He said be totally honest about everything.
Yes. My challenge is, no, we need to bring out the negatives, but also let's have as many positives. No, but thank you for that. And actually, that you illustrated in that talk that some of those tensions. So that's great. Well, let's and we'll explore those in a minute. But let's first go next to Gordon. Gordon Seabright is Chief Executive of the Eden Project. He joined Eden in 2014 from the National Cycling Charity, where he was Chief Executive, having previously been Director General of the RSA and Commercial Director of English Heritage. Gordon.
Thanks. Well, like Jess, I'm running a social business, a social enterprise, not actually an example of collective leadership. We're a bit different. What I would say, I guess, about running social enterprises and the leadership that's required is that it really is exactly the same leadership that is required in every other sort of enterprise. And I think sometimes in our sector, we are prone to thinking that somehow we're a bit different, we're a bit special, dread that we're a bit better, and I think that's so much nonsense. What I know about leadership actually could be relevant in any organisation, and I do know that there is a new style of leadership that I think is enormously important, and that old-fashioned leadership styles, they can work, but they don't work as well. as the newer style, and I should say something about that. But many of you may not have been to the Eden Project, so just very briefly, it is a social enterprise because actually is exactly as West Somerset has suffered. My bit of Cornwall lost its defining industry. Ours was China clay mining. And when you dig out China clay, you leave a big hole in the ground with nothing in it, no soil, so no plants, so no birds, no insects. And you're left with a wasteland, and the Eden Project is a transformation of one of those ruined places, and the idea was to show through working in harmony with nature and working as a community that you can transform a place and you can make it something wonderful. And the most wonderful thing there, I guess, is that it connects people with nature, and it does that through having the biggest rainforest in captivity in a big bubble. But the other bit of our mission is that we connect people with each other. I think that's the less well-known bit. Actually, it's the bit that excites me all the more. And we try and nurture a change around that connecting people with each other down in Cornwall, in our local community, and we do that in a number of ways. I mean, Cornwall's a bit of a test bed for the UK, and it has been since the Industrial Revolution. And we try to be that test bed of trying out new stuff. So at the moment, we're trying a load of social prescribing work, which is proving really interesting in very disadvantaged communities that I guess are facing much the same things that you were describing. And we seek to act. We seek to be at Eden as though, well, if Cornwall was a village, then Eden would be the village hall. And we want to be the convening place for the duchy. But you have to be asked to do that. And that's actually one of the trickiest bits of leadership at Eden. It's really easy, because we're big in Cornish terms, we're one of the biggest employers in the duchy. It's really easy to be Charlie Big Potatoes and hack everybody else off by putting yourself out there. And actually, we kind of need to sit, but we need to be asked. And then we're thrilled to be a part of it. Beyond Cornwall, we work in similar sorts of fields. The best known thing we do, I guess, is the Big Lunch, where every June we invite people to break bread together. And this year, about over 9 million people did that. And that's just a very simple way of trying to create those connections that we talk about. And we have to do that through catalysts. We can't go out and get 9 million people together. We work through the people in the communities. When you drive into Eden, and you probably do drive, most people do, you pass a sign that says we're ordinary people trying to change the world. And before I joined, I thought we must be really up ourselves to say that. But actually, that is exactly who we are. But there's only 500 of us. So if we're going to change the world, we'd better figure out how to work with other people. And you need, to my mind, you need certain qualities of leadership in order to do that. And I think the need for those qualities of leadership has been intensified, actually, with the generational change that we've seen in the last few years. Roughly half the people who work with me are of the millennial generation. And I'll overstate to make the case, because they're not from Mars, but they are different in their motivations and their style of work to previous generations, notably mine. And a lot of leaders of my generation are refusing to change to address that. And I think that's a terrible mistake. This is a generation who are hyper-connected constantly. They believe in collaboration. It's what they do all the time, and that's fantastic. They have a new definition of loyalty, which is quite challenging. I know I read a Deloitte's report 2 days ago that said 2/3 of millennials are planning to change employer by 2020. That's a challenge for leaders. And they have a different expectation of enjoyment at work and engagement in work and the relationship they're going to have with whoever the leader or leaders are than my generation ever did. And that's great. Work isn't just to pay for having fun outside work. Work is an integral part of their lives. So that means that leaders now, to my mind, have a set of qualities that we should treasure if they're going to be any good. And they are different to the qualities before. So they're around humility and kindness and openness and commitment and resilience and curiosity, intellectual curiosity. And I'm very happy to expand on that in a while. But the one other crucial thing, to my mind, about leadership today is the need for a low ego. And I know that sounds complete nonsense because I've put myself on a stage here to talk about leadership. However, go with me on it. this generation that are coming now, that are half my team, they want to be aligned around a purpose, and luckily Eden has one, and around a vision and a set of values. They don't want to be aligned around a person, and that's quite a challenge for the leader, because we've got some old-style leaders who love rallying people around a person. It doesn't work anymore, and shouldn't work anymore, but it doesn't. It means you perform worse if you have that old style of leadership. Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel, said that the leader now needs ambition for a cause greater than themselves. And I think that is a profound thought on which I will finish.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Now, you're pointing out the generational change at the Team of the Eden project leads perfectly into our next panellist, I think. So Jack Graham is CEO and founder of Year Here and a Claw Social Leadership Fellow. He was recently named one of Nesta and the Observer's 50 New Radicals. He has a strong track record in social innovation and youth leadership. Over to you, Jack.
And I was born in 1983, so I think I just about qualify as being a millennial myself. So yes, as Tony said, I run Year Here. Year Here is a postgraduate course in social innovation. So we work with young people, mostly 20-somethings, who are ambitious about making society better and put them through a very intensive year, which is unlike any master's degree, where they have an opportunity to try to build smart solutions to social problems. To give you 3 examples, in the last 10 days, I've seen Marsal Hedayat, who was on our 2016 cohort, interview David Miliband in New York. This came as a surprise to me. I saw on my Instagram that she was in New York interviewing David Miliband about the launch of a new scheme to employ 1,500 refugees. And she herself runs an organization called Chatterbox, which is a language tuition service staffed by refugees. Next up, I picked up my Financial Times on Sunday and saw 2 of our fellows, Juliana Matza and Jess Thompson, in there with their venture, which is called My Grateful, which is a cookery school, again, staffed by refugees. And finally, Josh Babarinde, who runs a social enterprise called Cracked It, which trains up young people who are involved in gangs to fix cracked iPhones as an entrepreneurial route away from crime, has just been appointed to be one of the Mayor's advisors on youth justice. So I'm constantly feeling somewhat inferior to the imlight of my own programme. And I also just read the acknowledgements of this book, which actually was edited by one of our fellows as well. So they're everywhere, and they seem to be achieving a hell of a lot more than I was at their age. So I guess I want to start with thinking about what the demands are for that generation. I work with millennials, and they have been born into the world that they're in. I would actually disagree with Gordon. I think social entrepreneurship does have some differences. I think it has everything that kind of traditional business or public sector leadership has, plus this additional responsibility to think through what your impact strategy is. So you have to make your business model work and your fundraising strategy work and all that stuff, but you also have to think about what kind of change am I trying to create in the world. And that's art or science, whatever it is incredibly, I think, intellectually demanding. So we often talk about 3 qualities that we are trying to inculcate in our fellows, and they are empathy, hustle, and acumen. So the last really speaks to the fact that, as I said, I think we often don't give enough weight to the fact that coming up with a venture that genuinely improves people's lives is not just about goodwill. It's about intent, and it's about really understanding the issue that you're trying to tackle. So in terms of these millennials that we're working with, I often think that there's kind of a wellspring of youthful idealism. So every year, thousands of people come out of university really fired up about social impact. And, you know, William Beveridge, back in the 20s, is an example of that, spending 2 years at Toynbee Hall in East London before going on to become one of the architects of the welfare state. Obama, being a community organizer in Chicago out of grad school. And I think every generation has an opportunity to reinvent what those changemaker qualities look like. I think one of the things that's unique about the millennial generation is that they have grown up in a time where kind of nothing is free anymore. I think I was one of the last year groups to go through university and only pay £1,000 a year for tuition, and obviously now they're all paying 27 grand. And so there's a sense that I think young people are more liberal in both kind of social and economically than previous generations, and don't expect the state to be able to solve the problems of society. and therefore social entrepreneurship is a really good fit for that kind of mindset. Often our fellows talk about their disillusionment with some of the traditional vehicles for social change, protest. They might have been involved in the anti-tuition fees protests or the anti-Iraq War March. We all know where those ended up. Politics as well. If you think of the state of politics for the last 10 years, if that was what you were born into, then you'd become pretty skeptical about that too. And traditional philanthropy and charity, I think people are increasingly critical about the kind of power structures that often creates. I was trying to think of 3 words that really define the generation that I work with, and I came up with compassionate, anxious, and woke. So for those of you who don't know, woke is kind of about being conscious and conscientious, and I think I've learnt more about intersectional feminism and racism and all sorts of things like that from these guys than I could ever have imagined. So they're incredibly aware of the injustices in society. And so thinking about the support that they need, one of the things that really sits at the heart of what we do is this idea that solving social problems starts with understanding them. And far too few people in positions of leadership have spent time with kids from chaotic family backgrounds or isolated older people who are feeling desperately lonely, and that sits at the very heart of Year Here, is this getting alongside people, understanding them as people, not as problems, and that's where you start. The second belief that kind of really informs everything we do is that the best way to learn how to build smart solutions to social problems is to try. So Year Here is all about trying and failing and trying again. And of course, there's all the practical stuff. They need a network, they need skills, they need money, they need an office space to work from if they're setting up their own thing. But I think possibly the most important thing that certainly the group that I work with need is belief. And belief that they can build something that's worth building, belief that they can genuinely be agents of change, and that's exactly what we intend to do.
Excellent, thank you, Paul. That's great. So last but definitely not least is Richard Harries, who was appointed Director of the Powers to Change Research Institute in November 2015. He's a former senior civil servant and Deputy Director of the think tank Reform. Richard has extensive public policy and research experience. So Richard, your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. I've got to say, I feel like a bit of a fake sitting up here because unlike my fellow panellists, I'm not a social business leader, but I have observed social businesses up close for some time, and I actually wrote a trilogy of papers for Claw Social Leadership last year, looking at the history of leadership development in the third sector in this country, looking at what the future might hold, and looking at how we might bridge the current gap in supply and demand for leadership development training in this country. And the good news for Claw is that they got £500,000 out of the lottery for that work, so I think that's a good return on their investment, if nothing else. And what I was going to do is just talk about some of the lessons I drew from that and try and bring them into what we've been talking about tonight. So this is well-trodden ground, as I'm sure you're aware. And just out of interest, I can see you. How many here remember the Third Sector Leadership Centre? One hand, Steve's hand goes up, and that's it. Two. There's 2 hands, not bad. Okay, so the Third Sector Leadership Centre was set up in 2006 with £750,000 of government money. It was here to set up a national forum for leadership development, an online directory of leadership development opportunities. There were over 50 regional leadership champions. There was a guide to leadership assessment tools and frameworks. There was a bank of case studies and a series of events and seminars, a bit like this.
But not as good.
Nowhere near as good. In fact, so bad that 3 years later, when the money stopped, the centre closed down. It came and it went. And actually, when you look at leadership development in the third sector over the last 20 years, that's what you see. You've got a pattern of sort of initiatives. The money runs out, the initiatives close down, and there's never any sustainability. And I would echo some of Gordon's points, actually. You know, there really is nothing new under the sun. Leadership in the third sector is actually not very different to leadership in any other sector. Certainly the issues raised by third sector leaders are not dissimilar to the issues raised by leaders in the private and the public sector. And there are lots of valuable lessons that can be drawn from other sectors, particularly under Tony Blair's leadership. We set up the NHS Leadership Academy. There was the National College for Teaching and Leadership. Both did excellent work driving up the quality of leadership in the NHS and schools. now sadly both a shadow of their sort of former selves. But the big difference is the funding that's available. The third sector in this country does not put enough money into leadership development in any way, shape or form compared to the public or the private sector. In the private sector, typically around 4% of their turnover is spent on leadership. And this is the sector, of course, that is focused on profits, and yet they think it's worth putting up to 4% of their turnover into developing their leadership cadre. By comparison, in the third sector, it's probably less than 0.5% based on the figures that I was able to collate. Now, we're not alone here. Evidence from America points in exactly the same direction. The difference there is that an organisation called the Grant Makers for Effective Organisations recognises that there's a challenge, and as grant makers, they've come together and said, this is a systemic challenge, and we must fill the gap, because if we don't provide the capacity to support leaders, nobody else will. And that is not a sustainable model. Again, as Gordon was saying, the idea of sort of the heroic leader who burns themselves out, doing whatever it takes to lead, didn't work 20 years ago. It certainly doesn't work now, and I agree with Jack on the new forms of leadership. And coming on to that, the future is absolutely shared and collaborative. Of course, nobody knows what the future will hold. I'm delighted to be the first person on this panel to mention Brexit. But I'll only mention it to say that it's not really important to the future. Actually, the really important things are demography and actually the ongoing impact of austerity. I mean, for all the talk of austerity for the last 5 years, it's only really beginning to hit now in terms of the rollout of universal credit and the cuts to councils really getting down to the bone. I hear stories all the time of councils, for example, that are planning to stop all funding to their public parks. And I don't really understand how that would work, how you would simply not fund the maintenance of public parks, but that's the sort of territory they're in. And that obviously creates really interesting opportunities for community groups to step in and do some of these things better, but it creates a really challenging landscape. And on demography, I think all I need to say is, we are getting older, and that's a good thing, and we're getting healthier in our old age, but nevertheless, the cost of end-of-year care is relentlessly going up. The Office of Budget Responsibility does a wonderful chart every 6 months, and everyone ignores it, including the government, which simply looks at the 50-year projections based on current policies, and basically whether or not Alistair Darling is able to do what George Osborne was unable to do and cut the deficit. It doesn't really matter, because our debt will just shoot out of control because of health and pension costs. It's that straightforward. There's a massive problem facing this country, and that is a relentless problem that we need a new solution to. And I would like to think that the third sector and community businesses could be part of that solution, and that collaboration is part of that future. Just echoing something that Jack was talking about on new ways of working, I think, Gordon, you mentioned this as well, the shift from command and control to more distributed networks. It was really interesting at the time of the downfall of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. The international media were desperately searching around to find who the leader was. Who was leading these young people to rebel and hit the streets? And they couldn't do it because it was all being done through social media. It was distributed leadership. And it was really interesting to see the media struggling with that idea of not being able to pick out the community leader who's behind it. But that is the way we work these days, and that's the way we have to work. And so collaboration is the future. And in any event, as I say, because of the changes in the public sector, there's much more porosity between the public sector and the private sector and the third sector. And from a leadership perspective, that's hopefully a good thing. I mentioned Jack, this great book. I hope you've all seen it, or if not, do go out and buy a copy. In Our Hands, A History of Community Business. Really useful to understand our deep roots, and this is not a new phenomenon. But just as things like the Industrial and Provident Society legislation was woefully out of date, I think that actually the charity structure is pretty much out of date as well. I think a lot of people nowadays want to do good, but they don't want all the kind of hassle that comes with charity regulation. And KICs are certainly part of the way out of this. I was actually involved in government at the time when we brought KIC legislation in. But it's not about, for me, legal forms. It's about mentality. It's a recognition that freedom and power come from operating on your own terms, that a commercial approach to doing good, tied to the needs of local people, is the future. That's the way things are going. I just wanted to end on a positive note, actually by going even further back in history to Pope Leo XIII, who 126 years ago talked about these two principles, subsidiarity and solidarity. And I think that is the key here. Working at the lowest possible level and working together collaboratively. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, that was a brilliant sweep of quite a few issues. And Richard, you've opened up some really broader societal questions at the end, which I'd really like to get to. But first, I think I'd like to push, actually, you, Gordon, first a little bit, on Tim Smith, right, the archetypal hero leader, surely. You know, he was the founder of the Eden Project, for those who don't know. He showed, you mentioned things, in fact, all of you mentioned qualities like grit and determination, vision and purpose, I suppose, and he had all of those. But surely the Eden Project really only exists because of him. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. And is there not still a place for that kind of heroic leader that people will gather around and follow? Or do you think that now, if you were going to found the Eden Project, you couldn't do it that way?
I think, who'd have guessed that I'd be asked about Tim? Tim aligned people. I was saying that, making that point around aligning people around a purpose and a set of values. And the reason that Tim was successful in getting Eden there in the first place wasn't so much that he was a personal rallying point. It was that there was a thing that people could understand the values of, and they could understand the purpose of. We were, clay mining died much more recently than coal mining in this country. We're still, in a very distressed area. People got what was needed, and they got the way that it was about reconnecting us. I mean, he happened to be doing it at exactly the time that people were understanding that we needed to reconnect ourselves with the living world. So, of course, leaders have to have a drive that mean that they can get obstacles out the way. I mean, that to my mind, leadership's fairly, actually sometimes fairly simple business. Kind of make sure you've got the right people, point them in the right direction and get the obstacles out of their way. And Tim's very good at getting obstacles out of the way. But it only works because he was aligning people around a set of values and a purpose, not because he was saying it's about me, me, me. And I should say, I've worked across all three sectors. Right. I have worked with people who do that last it's about me, me, me thing. And I've seen businesses fall in all sorts of trouble because of that.
So just 500 people. So I think you're the largest organisation represented on the panel by probably quite a long way. Presumably you're still organised in a fairly traditional hierarchical way, or have you found, is it a flatter sort of structure that you've got there? I'm just quite interested in the differences perhaps between the other organisations.
Eden's quite an unusual organisation. It does a whole lot of things. So it's obviously a visitor destination, but it's an environmental charity, it's an educational charity, it's a science organisation, an arts organisation. So it's quite hierarchical in the sense that there are a group of leaders who are responsible for each chunk of that, and my role is, it is actually as simple as making sure they're all pointed in roughly the same direction, and then getting obstacles out of their way, and working in that way. I talked about low ego style and the like, and I have to give the stage to those people so that they can achieve the things in their areas, and then create some form of meaning that enables it all to be pulled back together.
Jess, how do you think that contrasts? I mean, you were the one that really brought forward this idea of a collective leadership, and there's 5 of you that are so united in common vision and purpose and ambition, and you can substitute for each other and know kind of what... Now, that sounds quite different. I mean, if you were to scale your organisation up, so you got anything like the size of the Eden Project, would you still be able to work in that way, do you think?
I think we'd try very hard. We do still work in a completely non-hierarchical way. So Onion Collective is only 8 people. There are 4 directors and 4 non-directors. And we try as hard as we can, apart from when there's kind of a legal question or an HR question when we absolutely haven't got any choice, to not operate as if there's any distinction between directors and non-directors. And we try, and we will continue to try, to operate in that way. I mean, it's a nice idea. How practical that will be in the big scheme of things, I don't know. But I think the thing that's different is that we don't really... To me, leadership isn't about leading Onion Collective. It's about what Onion Collective is leading. So there are 500 people in Eden Project, but there are 4,000 people in my town, and I kind of view the leadership challenge as that, not how do we manage and construct our own organisation. And that has to be non-hierarchical, because as soon as you introduce the ego, and interestingly, one of the things I didn't say, which I wrote down, and Naomi, who was supposed to be doing this, would kill me, because she said, it's all about leadership, of course, but it's without ego, which is exactly what Gordon was saying. And I think that that's the thing that's critical. If you're working at a community level and you need to do that shared visioning and you need to get everyone behind you in the same way that you were just describing, you simply can't do it in a traditional hierarchical way. And what's also interesting is that actually I think I'm a Xennial, I get my own little tiny category, but we're actually in quite an ageing population. West Sunset's, it's lots of second homeowners or a gently ageing sort of indigenous population. And so we're kind of leading a group of people who aren't the millennials you're talking about. They are the traditionalists. They haven't grown up in this kind of wonderful collaborative thing. And we're the people who are trying to say, but let's do it this way. So it's kind of the opposite challenge. I haven't quite worked out what that means for us, but it makes me think we need to talk about it on the train. Like maybe we're assuming things about people and the way they work that actually maybe are wrong because we operate in that kind of collaborative way you've talked about, and maybe they don't always do so.
So one thing I thought that was common across all of you was mentioning purpose, and that actually is something which millennials particularly are seeking in their work. Actually, what I'm quite interested in is something which you've both mentioned, actually, which, given the two different scales of the organisation, is interesting. And that was something about leadership being about getting the legitimacy and permission from your communities and involving them also in that leadership of what it is of what that purpose is, I suppose. It's that participation in the purpose. But you're both place-based. I know you're a national charity and so on, but very much responses to a place, right? You mentioned the decline of the clay. So, Jack, I'm quite interested. Some of the enterprises you described that your graduates have set up, particularly around working with refugees, for example, that's responding to a different kind of need. Unless you told me different, that didn't sound like a place-based necessarily. That's more of a sort of a sectional or an issue-based response. Is there a question about legitimacy and how you involve the community in sort of having the right to kind of lead in that situation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And actually, in all those cases, those individuals will have worked with those groups, refugees and migrants in this country, through which they will have gathered insight, worked alongside people, been humbled a lot of the time, made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot and made a lot of friends, and as a result really got to understand what it might be like to be, in this case, a refugee or a migrant in this country. So actually that sits at the very heart of what we do. And I think also there is a spirit that they take with them, which hopefully in many years' time, if they choose to go into politics or they choose to take on different types of leadership roles beyond social entrepreneurship, I really hope that they hold on to that idea that you do things with people, not to them or for them or at them. You do things in collaboration, particularly when there's a kind of a power imbalance, as there often is. I think as a leader myself, I've become much more conscious of my gender, my race, my class, and what impact that has on other people I'm working with, the fellows that we recruit, and aware of the fact that we're living in a structurally, arguably sexist and racist and classist society, and what is my role there in terms of trying to counteract that as much as I can.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to pick up on I've written down a fantastic collection of adjectives about what leaders should be in this space, and a couple of people mentioned empathy. You mentioned empathy in particular, and you've been just describing that there, and that does seem to be quite key as a way of demonstrating legitimate leadership. And it can't escape our attention that it's a broadly middle-class, privileged, well-educated elite sitting on this table on a stage in a Georgian room, but it's something that we are conscious of at the RSA as well, with all of the sort of wealth and privilege that we represent. It's about trying to put that to good use. So, do you think that is? There's a question. One of the questions I want to draw out was the extent to which in this social enterprise space, that is a place in which good leadership that's applicable to all sorts of enterprises is a point that you've made. But that's a sort of a test bed for that new leadership more broadly. I mean, you mentioned people going to politics and so on. I mean, is that your hope, that actually this is bigger than as amazing as it is to start some enterprises working with vulnerable individuals, but this might infuse, you know, sort of more broadly in society? Definitely.
I mean, I think when you, a few years back, I would put up the three-party leaders. I think we had Ed Miliband, Cameron, and I can't remember who the hell the other one was at that time. Sorry, Lib Dems. But looking at their own career history, it's kind of embarrassing. You know, they've at best, I think Miliband had been a professor at Harvard, and that was like the most real-world thing that any of the three had done. Cameron was in PR before, and I think we've got a problem there where, you know, having not been in either business or anything kind of vaguely social impact related, what kind of preparation is that for leadership? And I'm really hopeful that we can see change. Obviously, we've kind of gone backwards in the States and to a certain extent here as well. So that's worrying, but I'm an eternal optimist. So hopefully we'll see new leaders who have that kind of life experience that gives them that empathy and the insight and fire in their belly to do something about you know, the issues facing people who have a lot less than them.
So that leads me on to Richard. I think you're able to give us the long view here, really, because of your experience in the sector and your research. And I thought you were highlighting a different form of leadership again, which was that the sector, in a sense, as a whole, collectively needs to show some leadership in addressing these massive challenges that you point to, the demographic challenges, you know, the aging, the health, sort of social care needs that we're going to have, and the old existing model of tax and spend state provision maybe will break somehow, and how to replace it. So how can the sector collectively you know, organise and, you know, make that leadership sort of visible and real, do you think, in a way that can influence the broader economy and society?
Well, look, it won't surprise you to hear that I think, you know, community business, as opposed to social enterprise or traditional charity, holds the key here. I mean, your question to Gordon about Tim Smith was you know, I think quite interesting. Because, of course, famously, Margaret Mead, I think, didn't say this, but nothing ever happens but for a few people sort of making it happen, or words to that effect. Often, social enterprises and community businesses start because one person or group of people get together and decide they have to do something. That's fine. What makes it a community business is when they bring the community with them in some way, and the community are involved directly in how that business is running. By the way, I should just get a plug in for our latest research out today on community accountability. Because often when we get applications at Power to Change from organisations that want our funding, they need to demonstrate they're trading organisations, they need to demonstrate they've got local people behind them, they need to demonstrate public good, but they also need to demonstrate that they're genuinely accountable to the community, and that's what they find the hardest, and this research goes into that and tries to untangle what you would look for. But that's the key. That's where leadership is transformed, because it's not just about one brilliant individual or a kind of group of directors. It's about the whole community taking ownership of the issues that it faces. I think, you know, it's on an unambiguously small scale, and it won't be the solution everywhere, but the mentality of saying we can do it ourselves, again, to use that horrible B word, it's the sort of brighter side of Brexit. It is taking back control in the right way. And I think there's a lot there for a different way of thinking about local leadership.
Thank you. Well, I've been absolutely not practicing what we're preaching here because I haven't involved the audience yet. So now, please, let's have some questions. Who would like to ask a question to the panel? The lady here at the front first. We'll take a group of three, if I may, and that gentleman at the front second. And let's do this side, and then if we can whiz up the side there to the lady right at the back, and I'll hopefully come back to you, sir, later. So, the front first of all.
Do you think that personal discipline and competition is crucial for business advancement, and that's what creates leaders? Because if you take the model of the Soviet Union, the model collapsed, and yet the kibbutz managed to transform itself again and again and again from farming to high tech. And another recent example is South Korea. The people personally gave their gold and other assets to the government to advance. But there is another very, very good example on our doorstep, and that is Celebrity Get Me Out of Here, a program on television. Through hunger, they become courageous and driven to create, to understand the meaning of life.
Well, thank you. I think that was possibly more of a contribution than a question, but I'll ask for responses. And well done for getting I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here into the... And so the gentleman at the front. And oh, by the way, I should have said, if you'd like to give your name and any organisation affiliation, please do to let us know.
Is this work? Oh, good. So my name's Ian Chambers. I'm the general manager at the Bevy pub in Brighton, community-owned business. I'm also part of the sort of South, we were actually the whole country, cohort on the community leadership programme. So my question is kind of around, it's something to do with Brexit. It's more, not so much the legal and the leaving of the EU, it's more about the schism. So it's the schism that is apparent right across society. And so at the Bevy, we deal with, we're an open door with the pub, so everybody walks in. And we try to get along, but some of us don't like each other, and they are either side of the schism. So the schism being, probably oversimplifying it, being some people seem to be quite kind and open and looking ahead and progressive, and other people are looking back and being frightened and are wanting it to not be the way it is, but in an unformed way. So the difficulty, the question is, how, as social businesses in particular, where do we put ourselves, and what really can we do about it? You know, how does leadership affect the fact that you're wanting people to think differently and who probably vehemently disagree with each other? I'm trying to think in a way of, so Jack's amazing sort of refugee intervention, the people that would be most would be incredible to get working is the people who resent those refugees being there. How as leaders might we do something about something like that? If that's not too big a question.
That's great. No, okay, now we've got that. And actually, I think there was a lady at the back, and then we'll take the gentleman in front as well. We'll have 4 this round as you're over there anyway.
Hi.
So.
Thank you so much for the event. It's super interesting. My name is Leila. I'm a co-leader of an organization called Make Sense. So we've built the collective leadership this last 4 years. We started 7 years ago. It's been an incredible tool for sustainable growth and also to build a strong culture within the organization. However, I think our partners and clients do not always understand this. They think it's super inspiring, it's very innovative, but they rather prefer traditional system with one leader, one entrepreneur. It will make things much more easier, and same for the media. They love to have just one person. So when you Google, you just find one person. So this is an external pressure. And sometimes it's a pressure that would, for some people in the organization, maybe be a motivation to go backwards, because it looks simpler, like why do we go into such a more complicated organization design? So I would love to hear, mostly I guess from Jessica, what are your pieces of advice to deal with such pressure? Thank you.
The gentleman in front.
Hello, Ian Dodds, CEO of Ian Dodds Consulting. I'm intrigued that no one has mentioned inclusive leadership because you've all referred, or not all of you, but there have been several references to the leadership that's required in social business as being the same as that's required in other enterprises. And I do a lot of work in the commercial and public sectors. And in this part of the 21st century, the leadership that is seen to be needed is inclusive leadership. That's leadership which engages people around a vision of future success, which means that people, whatever their diversity, feel valued and respected. They feel listened to. They feel empowered. And what's more, the organization does everything possible to engage and to embrace and engage diversity of thought. And incidentally, recent research shows that the millennials differ from the previous generations in the sense that they see diversity being about diversity of thought, whereas the previous generations saw it being about visible factors of diversity. So my question is, where does inclusive leadership come in, and why has it not been mentioned?
Thank you. Right, plenty to chew on. I'm going to ask, on that inclusive leadership point, Gordon, I thought maybe, would you like to comment on that, or, and also Jack, if you'd like to?
I think Ian made a fantastic point there, especially about millennials, is again, not wishing to treat them as an entirely distinct group, but one thing I observe about the millennial generation is that there is a taking for granted, a very welcome taking for granted of diversity. It seems to people from that generation a lot of the time quite unthinkable that one wouldn't have a diverse leadership or a diverse organisation, and that's an all-round good thing. I think it's good that you raise the subject, and I did touch on some of the characteristics that I think are important of a successful leader now, an effective leader now, and I'm thinking that they are highly relevant to that, because curiosity, I think, implies an openness. Well, I mentioned openness as well, an openness to different experiences, all different types of people. And I certainly would hope that at Eden we exemplify being an organisation where we seek to provide precisely the same quality of experience for all our staff and indeed all our visitors. It's good that you raised the point.
Thanks. Jack, if you wanted to comment on that, but also the point about the schism and bringing communities together, I mean, is that something which your participants
I think
are thinking about?
They're definitely related questions. The Brexit vote was actually on the day of the graduation of one of our cohorts. So we had a great celebration that night. The next day was the final day of the cohort, which ended up being a bit more like a wake. And recognised that there wasn't a single person on that cohort of 26 people who had voted for Brexit. And that actually did make me think about how I felt like, a lot of Remainers would have felt that feeling that day of where are they? Who are these people who voted for this? Let's go find them. And over time, recognising, okay, this is part of our country, and if you have those open internationalist values, then you're going to have to recognise that, perhaps half the country feels differently to you. And I think incorporating and appreciating those different sets of values is an incredibly important leadership skill and quality. And actually, one of the founders of the refugee initiative that I mentioned, My Grateful, she actually, during the programme, was tasked with a kind of consulting project with Hounslow Council, where she was working on an estate near Heathrow Airport, and was working with some older women who expressed some pretty racist views, which she really struggled with, but I think was probably one of the most profound transformative moments for her, to be able to, definitely disagree with the view, but recognise the person and where they were coming from. And I think that's about becoming a bigger leader that can, as I say, incorporate different perspectives, different viewpoints. That is what I think it's all about. And maybe it's semantics, but maybe that's what inclusive leadership means to me as well, is incorporating that diversity of thought and those different perspectives and values, and not just casting them aside, because it's very easy just to protect your own values and to judge those that have a different set. I think it's harder and better to actually recognise them, acknowledge them, and respect them.
That is one of the numerous pitfalls of the old-style hero-leader concept, though, isn't it? It is the nature of them that they are generally my age or a bit older and white and male, and so just if you don't challenge that hero-leader model, you're building in a continuation of the failure to embrace inclusion in leadership.
And so that actually that speaks to the point about what happens when you have got a new leadership model, but you are butting up against a system which is possibly still trapped in that paradigm. And how do you cope with that? Jess, I thought maybe this might be something you've got some reflections on.
Yeah, I kind of have reflections on everything. So I think the question about how do you do collective leadership when other people want you to be traditional, I think that we recognise across the group of us that we all have really different strengths, and we all believe that each other are better than us at some things, and we know that we're better at them than other things, and so we just play to those strengths. And sure, some people want someone who's going to stand up and talk on the Today programme, which I did today. And of course they sent me because I'm the person who gets sent to go and talk on things like that. And that's fine, because at the same time, Georgie is the person who goes and talks to people who need someone who's really empathetic and isn't going to do what I'm going to do, which is try and tell them how they think they should think, because that's not what I'm brilliant at. She's brilliant at that. And so we just play to our strengths. I think the thing that's difficult about it is where you have to find a balance of responsibility and where we have to all make sure we feel like everyone is pulling their weight and doing the same things and that we're all playing a kind of role in this. And in order to make that kind of collective leadership work when everyone's doing different things, we just have to be really, really honest with each other. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we get all cross and angry, and then usually everyone cries, and then we sort it all out and it all goes off again. But we have to be really honest about those problems where they come up. And I think that is a bit about this kind of humility and the lack of ego. Like, we have to sometimes all just sit down and say, all right, enough, what's going on here and how are we going to figure it out? And we kind of try and do that in the community as well. So to kind of address Ian's question about the schism, and the Brexit question, really. Like, to me, it's all about control and power. And the thing, you know, I woke up on that Brexit morning, and for the first time really in my life, because I'm educated, middle class and so on, I felt like I had no control, I had no idea where I was, what was going on in my country. And it took me about 10 minutes to realise that's exactly what caused this vote to happen. Because actually, I lived it for 10 minutes, and it was awful. And I hadn't lived it for my entire life. And so if you understand that and recognise that and then go and start having those conversations, and if you allow people to say the things that are terrifying them or that they don't like or they're unhappy about, then you can start to get over those problems. And if you recognise people have differences, and that's fine, like, it's okay. We can all disagree on things as long as we can talk about it. When we do our work with our community, we always make sure we give as much time to people saying negative stuff as positive stuff, which kind of goes against what people tell you should do. But actually, you have to let that conversation happen, and you have to let people say what's upsetting them and why they're hurt and what they don't like and what they're scared of, in order to be able to have the positive conversations that mean you can get over some of those schisms and try and move forward.
Thank you. Well, I've shown dreadful leadership on the time, but I blame the clock, which is slow. Apparently it's a bit old. But I wonder if you will indulge me. If somebody has a one-sentence question on this side of the room, would you like to offer it?
Do we have to do one-sentence answers?
You do have to do one-sentence answers, apart from Richard, who is, I'm going to ask to sum up slightly. So I think the gentleman in the middle caught my eye, so let's have your one-sentence question.
Hello. My name is François Moscovici, and one of my roles is to run the RSA Reinventing Work Network, where we think about devolved leadership. So my one-sentence question is, people driven by meaning is great, but the world is driven by many other things than meaning. So in a large organization, such as the Eden Project, what proportion would you say are people driven by paying the mortgage as opposed to changing the world, and how do you engage them?
Oh, okay, it was a long sentence, but it was a good question. So can I, actually I'll start with Gordon, and we'll go along, if I may. So where does the balance lie, actually, in terms of people who, you know, who aren't here tonight and just want to pay the rent?
What, among staff?
Yeah.
Every one of my staff, every one of my team has to pay the mortgage and pay the rent. That's a key part of what they do, and we better run an organisation really well that enables them to do that. And at the same time, they've chosen, like many of us in my sector, you know, to be underpaid and overworked in the service of something that they really believe in. And I suspect that's true of all of us up here.
Well, it probably is, but Jess, I'll ask a slightly different question. In your community, which is...
answer in one sentence.
well, no, but what I'm trying to tease out is that, yes, of course, in the Onion Collective, you know, people will be highly driven and of that type. But actually in the community at large, is there space, you know, in when you are struggling for economic survival, is there space for this sort of more aspirational, purpose-driven involvement in in
From
in
the people
community?
who we're trying to work
Yeah,
with
yeah,
from
yeah.
our community.
Yeah.
There are, for some of them, and for some of them, absolutely not.
Right.
You know, you can't expect people who have got 3 jobs and are trying to feed their kids to also be able to come down and spend hours doing a community workshop. Of course you can't do that. And there has to be some kind of recognition of that, and you have to find other ways to connect with those people and to talk to them. But the fact that not everybody can try and find a way to earn a living trying to make the world a better place is kind of neither here nor there, so long as some of us are, and we're trying to do that in a way that is inclusive and that does make an effort to go and involve all of those other people who can't afford to give that much time.
Thanks. Jack, what's your view? When you are challenging traditional masters sort of education.
It's true. I think we all have a mixture of motivations to do what we do, from purpose and meaning to validation. Money's definitely in there, learning. And I think the thing that we're trying to tackle is that often young people are kind of sold a lie about what they can achieve. And if you look at some of the marketing material of big corporate grad schemes, they talk in a lot of, terms like meaning and purpose will be in their copy. And then they get in there, and 2 or 3 years later, they often make an application to Year Here. So we often come across those people who just realise it's not there, and that part of their motivation is not being fulfilled. I would agree with Jess, it's not for everyone. It's a really tough path to choose, and you have to balance, how does this work financially? How do I pay the bills? But there's clearly a deficit, a kind of purpose deficit in a lot of jobs, and that's why I think people are looking for something different.
Brilliant. I think you've introduced another adjective, authenticity, there, which was quite... So, Richard, you don't have to answer that question. I'd like to invite you to get to sort of, is there a burning thought which you've had, a reflection which we haven't yet covered and nobody's asked a question?
No, I mean, there's so much I could say. But actually, I wanted to come back to the first question that was asked around the need for sort of personal discipline, you were saying, and sort of some of the challenges that we face. But because I think that is actually quite relevant to a lot of community businesses that I've seen over the years. I want to give 3 examples. So number 1 is Borsall Heath in Birmingham, where 30 years ago now they had a problem with prostitution. So the people just decided they'd get out deck chairs and clipboards and sit down and write down car number plates as punters went by, and that had a magnificent effect on deterring people from driving past looking for prostitutes. And when they realised they could do that, the next question was, what else can we do? And 30 years later, they've got a really well-developed community development trust doing lots of activity there. Second example, New Wortley in Leeds, where there was a problem with a really dangerous main road that was killing the children, and people were really upset about that. So they just did an illegal take over the road, and the police had to come. And again, what happened was this realisation, if we can do this, what else can we do? And they're now a really, really thriving community business. And the last is Ian and the Bevy, actually, where the pub previously was not well liked. The police wanted to close it down. But the community got together and said, no, this is really important to us, and we can use this as a facility for ourselves, and took control. So in each of those cases, out of adversity and trouble and strife came something really rather wonderful, actually. Can I say something about Brexit?
Oh, you did so well leading to just a high triumphant ending of inspirational. Go on then.
Well, no,
final word. People do have to go. Very quick.
So I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and grew up there for 10 years. So I've always looked at this country from the outside in. And I personally was not surprised by the referendum result. Because I did go around the country and I did see that schism that I think people now recognise. I saw that everywhere, that there was a whole section of the population that did not feel a part of what was going on in this country. And I think the answer is absolutely in small local conversations and solving it at that level. It'll never be done by national government programmes. This is about people talking to people. What could be more positive than that?
That's a fantastic note on which to end. So thank you for that, Richard. Thank you for all of you. I'm sorry we've overrun a bit, but I'm sure you'll agree that was a fantastic, fascinating conversation. Thank you for your contributions from the audience, and please join me in thanking our panellists, Jess Prendergast, Gordon Seabright, Jack Graham and Richard Harries.